All right. Well, welcome everybody. We appreciate your presence today for our AAPG Petroleum, Structural Geology and Geomechanics Division webinar. We have Dr. Elena with us from the University of Alberta, and she's going to be giving a great talk today. If you have questions, we do have the question and answer chat open, so please type your questions in there. That way it helps us to keep track of them. Sometimes if you type them into the chat, they kind of get lost as more people start to type in chats or comments or other things in there. And I guess with that, we will get started. So we've got Dr. Elena with us. She joined the University of Alberta in 2017 as Associate Director of Integrated Petroleum Geoscience Program, where she is teaching reservoir geomechanics, seismic reflection interpretation, and she's also supervising some capstone projects. Before that, she had a career in academia and consulting industry. She worked at Schlumberger as a Moscow team leader of geomechanic engineers and as a research scientist at NIRS ETE, Quebec City, and the Geological Institute of Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, and as an invited professor at CNRS University, Montpellier too. She obtained a bachelor's degree in geology with honors at Lomonosov, Moscow State University, and she graduated with a PhD at the Geological Institute, Russian Academy of Sciences. Her interest involves structural geology and tectonic evolution of orogenic belts. It's a great hobby, as well as sedimentary basins, and analog modeling of fault kinematics, fault architecture, and influence of natural and hydraulic fractures, and also faults on the distribution of state stresses, pressure regimes, and permeability of flow units in subsurface reservoirs. And her recent research focuses on predictive models of fault, of the fault's hydraulic behavior and fault shear reactivation potential, and topsoil breaching under the in situ stresses and pore pressure changes caused by depletion or injection operations. So if you've been around the industry in the past 5 to 10 years, that's a very important subjects. And with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Elena to get started.
Thank you very much, Molly, and thank you very much for the introduction and the Petroleum Structural Geology and Geomechanics Division for the invitation. I'm really happy to present the results that my co-authors and I did as a work. So I will just close up the view so we don't lose the side view. So today we would like to present the work on the shear slip fault reactivation and induced seismicity associated with hydraulic fracturing in the Duvernay Formation, Fox Creek area, Alberta, Canada, with insights from 3D reservoir geomechanical modeling. My co-authors are Kyego Lee, Alexey Jmodik, Charles Belik-Bu. They are former engineers at Schlumberger, Calgary. Ryan Schultz, seismologist at Stanford University, previously worked at Alberta Energy Regulator, and Todd Shipman, geophysicist from Alberta Energy Regulator. A few words about the school I am coming from. So Integrated Petroleum Geoscience Program is hosted by Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Department at the University of Alberta. So on the top view, it's a nice summer day building of the department. In the middle top photo, it's a view of the campus in the fall. With in the background, we see the North Saskatchewan River, which is flowing from all the way from the Canadian Rockies to the Hudson Bay. And on the top right is the photo of the icy fog during very cold day in the morning in the winter. So last winter we had -42 when you had -20 in Texas. So undergraduate studies at our department offers multidisciplinary divisions, including environmental earth sciences, geology, and field schools. IPG program is a one-year course-based master degree program, which takes students for a year. And we also offer field work in Drumheller, which is halfway between Calgary and Edmonton. And it's located in the place where the Museum of Dinosaurs is found. Those beds represent the beds with the remnants of dinosaurs, Upper Cretaceous. Another beautiful feature of our department, which I would like to share as an experience. So the school is found in Edmonton. On this map on the top left, I will point. Edmonton is here. So Western Canada Sedimentary Basin is shown in blue. It's found between the Canadian Cordillera and Canadian Shield. And it's somewhat 300 kilometers from the mountains. So John Waldron and his team, he's professor of structural geology at the department. They had an idea and realized the geoscience garden. So they put the large boulders of rock slabs arranged in landscape layout that represent geology of Western Canada. And it includes clastic sedimentary rocks, carbonate rocks, igneous metamorphic rocks. They plot in a way that would show other outcrops, and students of second introductory course of structural geology can get the skills in mapping from outcrops without going into the mountains, like 3 hours of drive. So thank you, Molly, for the presentation. So I will not go through the slides in details, just say that there are several research subjects, research topics that I recently or in my past, including a beautiful occasion to go to the Central Labrador Trough, where the structural geology is fascinating, and geomechanics modeling for CO2 storage in St. Lawrence lowlands in Quebec. And presently, since I joined the University of Alberta about 5 years ago, I work on the Duvernay unconventional play. That is the subject of today's talk. So before starting the talk, I would like to thank companies that contributed to the study. Pulse Seismic donated 3D seismic data, Schlumberger for donation of consolidated license to the University of Alberta, Geologic Systems for digital LIS files and well data, Energy Company for permission displaying microseismicity data, and National Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada for funding of this work. So the motivation of this work is growing awareness that hydraulic fracturing can sometimes induce seismicity. So on the map at the top right, we see the Alberta highlighted by yellow, and Duvernay Formation, which is Upper Devonian organic rich mudstone, is highlighted by green color, or in the main map at the bottom, it's shown as a shadow. So the zones of production of the Duvernay and hydraulic fracturing, they were associated with induced seismicity since 2013. And some of the earthquakes, induced earthquakes, were really very strong. So it's a magnitude up to 3.9 and 4.1. They're listed below. One of these earthquakes occurred in the study area that I present today. So probably the noticeable feature is that all these induced earthquakes are related to apparently a shear slip reactivation of faults or fracture zones. They occur both in West Shale Basin and East Shale Basin. So Fox Creek is somewhere in the middle, and the event that we represent today is third from the left. They all located at the distance of about 120, 150 kilometers east from the deformation fault in the Canadian Rockies. So I will begin with introductory slides about the Duvernay Formation and Western geological structure of Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. And then we will concentrate on the local area of induced seismicity and how so the only thing that was known about it, that there was the induced seismicity occurred during the hydraulic fracturing. So we started with analyzing 3D seismic data and to identify linear discontinuities. Then we completed geomechanical modeling to simulate properties of rocks and stress pore pressure. And then we run discrete fracture network, hydraulic fracture modeling, and reservoir pressure built-up simulation to see whether the pore pressure that was created during the hydraulic fracturing in the well can be transmitted to the zone of induced seismicity and how long it will take. And in the end, we run 3D reservoir, coupled reservoir geomechanical modeling to interpret whether the identified fault would reactivate and in which mode. And I will end up with a few slides about the strike slip faulting and the Western Canada sedimentary basin, how we can explain the occurrence of those faults because they represent a major risk for hydraulic fracturing of the Duvernay Formation in terms of induced seismicity. So the Western Canada sedimentary basin is located between the Canadian Rockies in southwest and Canadian Shield in the northeast. It represents the basement and the sedimentary cover deepen to the southwest towards the Canadian Rockies, and it includes Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and a few of Cenozoic strata. So maximum burial occurred during at about 60 million years ago, and the more recent uplift and erosion happened during the Laramide deformation at about 48 million years ago. It was more pronounced erosion and uplift was happened in the northeast and less of the uplift and erosion, but still a lot, about 900 meters happened closer to the deformation front. Present-day stress regime varies laterally across the basin, so it's closer to the thrust fault regime when we are within the influence of the deformation front of the Canadian Rockies. Most of the basin is characterized by strike slip stress regime, and in the northeast, when we're getting to the Saskatchewan province, close to the Canadian Shield, it's a normal fault regime. And present-day maximum horizontal stress is oriented northeast, southwest at about 45 degrees. The organic rich mud rock of the Duvernay Formation, which is Upper Devonian, was deposited during the maximum transgressive stage of flooding over the large parts of Western Canada sedimentary basin, mainly on the top of the platform carbonates. So below the Duvernay, there is the carbonate rocks of Swan Hill Formation and some other units, and above the Duvernay, immediately it's overlain by the lean carbonate-rich shales of Ireton Formation, over which there are again carbonate, Upper Devonian carbonates deposited. So on the map at the right, we see the top of the Duvernay Formation, which deepens from the northwest to the southeast towards the Canadian Rockies. The colored map shows the distribution of Duvernay Formation, which is surrounded either by the carbonate reefs or uplifted basement in the Peace River Arch or deformed belt in the southwest. And the study area is located in the West Shale Basin, close to the reefs in the southwest. And the Duvernay Formation is mostly developed through the multi-stage horizontal fracturing technology. It is located at the depth of about 3 to 3.5 kilometers within the study area. And this is the zone that is characterized by high overpressure, most likely due to hydrocarbon maturation and expulsion. The gradient of overpressure is going up to 20 kPa per meter. And this is the zone where hydraulic fracturing is associated with induced seismicity. So the particular area that we're looking for in this study is located south of Fox Creek. So what we have known before we started to work with that where the earthquakes occurred somewhat 4 days after the beginning of treatment of wells in PAD, which is shown on the map at the left. So the wells were treated in zip fracture mode. It means that the laterals A and B were treated at the same time from the end of April, beginning of May. And then wells C and D were treated also together in intermittent regime, zipper fracturing. They started on May 22 and ended at the beginning of June. So the earthquake started on May 26, and then they occurred mostly in the northern cluster. Then they occurred in the southern cluster at the beginning of June, and both clusters were reactivated later on at mid-June. So the zone of induced seismicity is located somewhat 500 meters east of the injection well, lateral D, and mostly also above the Duvernay formation, not that much inside it. So we started interpreting 3D seismic data in the hope to find any lateral discontinuities of faults that can be associated with this seismicity. So generally, the structure is very simple. They take subhorizontal beds, very smoothly dipping to the southwest. The Duvernay formation is on the left at the map. It shows the depth slice within the Duvernay formation, and on the right it's a cross section west-east. So there is no any displacement vertical offsets of the horizons in the zone of induced seismicity, and thickness of the Duvernay formation varies from 25 meters in the southwest to about 65-70 meters in the northeast, and it's about 50 meters within the treatment of the wells. That basically determines the height of the hydraulic fractures. So after analyzing amplitude cubes, we ran the workflow of untracking attribute with several steps, and the results are shown on the map on the left, the cross section on the right. So untracking is highlighted by dark blue color. It shows the presence of the linear features that can be correlated with structural heterogeneity into the underlying carbonate rocks that are highlighted in the map by the structural map of the top of Swan Hill Formation in color. And one of these features can be interpreted as a fault because it's actually coincide well with the location of the induced seismicity. And on the cross section, we see that this fault can be interpreted from the top of the basement to the from the top of the basement to the top of the Arton Formation above the Duvernay, and with as a dashed uncontinuously present into the Wabamun carbonates above the Arton Formation. The length of the fault is about 1.4 kilometers, and the height is about 680 meters. So the fault is interpreted as a pre-existing strike slip fault because there is no any vertical offsets along the fault wherever we look at it. So and the seismic was acquired before the beginning of the hydraulic fracturing. The 3D geometry of fault was interpreted from seismic, and actually it's not a flat surface. It's the surface of the fault is shown on the map at the left. It's slightly curved, and in geomechanical modeling, each cells in the model which is crossed by the fault surface, it's assigned to the fault elements. It's shown in the middle. And if we look at the map on the top right view, that is the horizon slice at the depth of the injection in the Duvernay Formation. We see that the fault shows the presence of two segments, northeast, southwest oriented at about 33 degrees to present day orientation stress, and they are connected by the relay zone, which is more north-south oriented. Okay. So the next step was to realize a geomechanical modeling or build a mechanical earth model. So it was done at the beginning for as a 1D modeling along 4 wells inside the seismic volume, and then completed in 3D volume for the studied area. It takes the steps interpreting the structure from the seismic, then assign mechanical stratigraphy for sedimentary succession from the top, from the day surface to the base, to the top of the basement. Then we interpreted rock mechanical parameters for other continuous profiles from well logs and calibrated with core data results, including Young modulus Poisson ratio strength parameters. We estimated vertical stress by integrating density data and predicted pore pressure using sonic velocity in 1D modeling, and predicted horizontal stresses, analyzed also the direction of maximum horizontal stress, and after that allows to go to the failure analysis, whether it's wellbore stability or it is a reactivation of faults. That is a general workflow. So horizontal stress magnitude was interpreted by using pore elastic horizontal strain model for isotropic medium. This model helps to estimate magnitude of total horizontal stresses as dependent not only the pore pressure, maximum vertical stress and Poisson ratio, but also Young modulus and tectonic strains. And this model accounts for the cases when the stiffer rocks like carbonate or sandstones are under the higher horizontal stresses than adjacent weaker rocks like shales. And its application is really helpful in the areas where with the compressive tectonic stresses. So that is the case of Fox Creek area, which is located in the area of the strike slip fault regime. So here we look at the chart of the 1D geomechanical model for one of the vertical wells. From the left to right, it shows the depth tracks, stratigraphy, mechanical stratigraphy, azolithology track, gamma ray, Young modulus Poisson ratio, tensile strength, unconfined compressional strength, angle of internal friction, predicted pore pressure, vertical stress and horizontal stresses. The next track is the mud weight window, which includes the four gradients of breakout gradient as a yellow, pore pressure gradient gray, mud loss gradient as a purple, and dark blue is a breakout gradient. The next track is the synthetic borehole breakouts as a red color, and the last track is the recorded caliper. So what we calibrated the results of the mechanical rock properties modeling by core data. So the dots at the bottom of the slide into the Duvernay formation, they represent the results of measurements of these parameters in the core in the lab, and pore pressure and minimum horizontal stress were calibrated by the results of DFID test data. The maximum horizontal stress was constrained by the wellbore stability model. It means that we compared the behavior of the relationship between the mud weight and borehole breakout gradient or mud loss gradient, but in this case it wasn't a problem. And then we compare the synthetic borehole breakouts produced by the wellbore stability model to the recorded caliper to constrain the magnitude of maximum horizontal stress. So what we could conclude after the 1D modeling that the maximum horizontal stresses concentrate on the intervals of stronger carbonate rocks in the Wabamun group here. And when we go down to the shales in the Ireton and Duvernay formation, so the horizontal stresses are getting less in magnitude than the vertical stress. And that actually corresponds to well to the observation which was known before, that the larger earthquakes with strike slip mechanism coincide generally with stiffer carbonate intervals above the Duvernay formation, not with the Duvernay formation itself. So after that, we ran 3D finite element modeling to predict initial horizontal stresses. So the chart on the right, it's a cross-section across the volume of pore pressure predicted. So it shows the formation pressure is about 52 to 59 megapascal in the Duvernay formation. It's highly overpressured formation with a gradient 16 to 17 kPa per meter. And on the left, we see the profile across the volume of minimum horizontal stress gradient. It shows that the minimum horizontal stress gradient is actually has a good stress contrast at the top of the Duvernay and bottom of the Duvernay formation. That predicts that the hydraulic fracture should be well contained inside the formation. And we will see in the slides later that it's confirmed by the microseismic clouds. So the azimuth of the maximum horizontal stress in this particular area, it's slightly different from the regional one. It's 43 degrees northeast, as was determined from the body hole breakouts and image logs by Shen and Kotas previously. So the next step was to model discrete fracture network, because if we model hydraulic fracturing without presence of natural fractures represented by DFN, hydraulic fractures grows very too large, much larger than observed microseismic clouds. So the discrete fracture network was generated by using trends from untracking attributes, and then 3D representation, which we observe here, was simplified to 2D representation, which is the next slide. So in this slide, we see the two sets of fracture sets that were generated during the DFN simulation. One of them parallel and another orthogonal to the maximum horizontal stress. They are all vertical, and actually this choice of the sets of the simulated natural fractures is consistent with the statistically significant natural fracture sets determined in the area from the well-bore images published by Pat Fothergill and co-authors. They have shown that, sorry, there is a raised hand. Should I answer or should I continue? Okay.
If you want to answer it, you can, or we can come back to it at the end, whatever's easier.
Okay, good. I will continue, then I answer all questions until the end. So they predicted there are two major sets, orthogonal and parallel to the maximum horizontal stress, and one is oblique, which we didn't introduce in this modeling. So what we see in the next slide is the unconventional fracture modeling that we done for hydraulic fracturing, building the complex hydraulic fractures growing with interacting with the natural fractures of DFN. So what we see is that the hydraulic fractures, they interact with natural fractures. Basically, they stop at they grow generally in the orientation of the maximum horizontal stress, which is normal, and then they stop at the arrested by the orthogonal natural fractures. Fluid propagates along those until it meets the next large fractures going parallel to the maximum horizontal stress. And one of the fractures, it reaches the fault, which was interpreted nearby these fractures from the untracking attribute. So what the induced seismicity started 4 days after the beginning of treatment in the real life. So in our modeling, one of the fractures reaches the fault 6 days later. So probably if we had additional set of discrete fracture network or we played with the density of discrete fracture network, especially length and density permeability of the orthogonal fractures, natural fractures, probably the hydraulic fractures would grow further at the earlier stages of hydraulic fracturing and reach the fault earlier, so it would be better fit. But still, we considered that this is a not bad consistency between the observed and real facts. So this map shows the microseismic clouds from simulation of this well part and simulated hydraulic fractures in the middle map. So the all microseismic events are with low magnitude shown in blue color. They are associated with hydraulic fracturing stages that line up with the orientation of maximum horizontal stress nicely. And the larger events in green and orange colors, they are mostly reactivation events. They form two main clusters with largest events located northeast of the well D. That is actually the area where the interpreted fault was found from seismic data. And the geometry of the hydraulic fractures in the middle map, it shows that the hydraulic fractures grows in approximate simulated ones. They grow at about 300 meters half length, which corresponds, which is in good correspondence with the observed microseismicity associated with hydraulic fracturing stages. So all induced seismicity events related to reactivations, they are located above the Duvernay, while hydraulic fracturing events are located inside the Duvernay. It's the cross section at the right bottom. So the next step was the model reservoir pressure built up. So we look here at the map and cross section of the, it was unstructured production grid. The map and cross section correspond to the time step of the end of injection. So what it shows that the maximum bottom hole pressure that reached, according to recordings, 80 MPa in the wells. So it corresponds to 23 kPa per meter by the end of injection. It's somewhat 20 megapascal above the initial pore pressure in the well, in the formation at the depths of the wells. So this pressure is simulated in the model using hydraulic fracture model, and it's transmitted by one of the fractures that reaches of the fault within 6 days from the treatment wells to the fault zone. So also, of course, natural fractures can contribute to the pressure transmission. And the final step of our study was finite element modeling of increase of fluid pressure inside the fault zone to analyze what would happen with the horizontal stresses and how the fault would be reactivated. So we applied increased fluid pressure in the fault zone, assuming that we can transmit 20 megapascal from the well treatment zone to the fault zone. And we did it by time steps of fluid pressure increase 5, 10, 15, and 20 MPa in the fault zone. So this is a chart of the that shows the fault at different steps. At the top, it's 5, 10, and 50 MPa of increasing pore pressure, and then the main chart is the 20 MPa pore pressure increase. So that shows the look at the fault across the well D to the northeast, and it shows the attribute of fault maximum plastic shear strain, which is in color show from blue to green, yellow, and red. That is, those are the cells that experience plastic shear deformation, or basically they experience non-reversible deformation or slip. And that deformation is located, starts in the Duvernay formation, and then it expands upward into the Ireton formation, basically covering the area where the pore pressure is higher from the beginning. So that happens because, on the bottom, we have the analytical solution for the shear slip tendency of a fault. So if we increase the pore pressure, the effective normal stress acting on the fault became less. So the ratio of shear stress over the effective normal stress is increasing. And when it gets higher than the slip, when the slip sliding frequency, sliding friction coefficient, then the slip in the fault occurs. If we analyze the amount of plastic shear displacement along the fault, it's shown by the color in the fault elements. That is the horizon slice in the Duvernay formation at the injection level. So it shows that the maximum shear slip occurred, plastic shear slip occurred in the fault is up to 3 centimeters. And also, we can observe that the maximum horizontal stress when it in cells in fault elements that experience plastic deformation, it rotates and gets parallel to the fault. And there is a transition zone between the fault elements that yield plastic shear deformation and the intact rock material where the stress is rotating. If we estimated magnitude and moment release caused by shear displacement by two methods. One is from the simulation results, number is shown on the top, and one is from radial seismic energy from the magnitude of the earthquake. Maximum one occurred in the area. So in both cases, it shows a good correlation between the amount of the shear slip that we estimated from simulation, 3 centimeters, the area of slipped float segment, and shear modulus of the fault. So that gives the comparable numbers, and also the length of the slipped segment. It goes to the magnitude of about 3.9, which was observed during the simulation, during the hydraulic fracture stimulation of the wells. So the maximum plastic shear strain can also be plotted as a vector in the vector mode, which is on the left map. It shows the size of the vectors corresponds to the magnitude of plastic shear strain. So we see that two segments, northeastern one and southwestern one, the plastic shear strain is higher, and these segments are optimally oriented to the maximum horizontal stress present day at about 33 degrees. And relay zone that is oriented at slightly higher angle, there is less deformation that can be determined from the simulation, and that corresponds well to the distribution of the earthquakes occurred in the area, and also correspond to the dextral strike slip deformation determined from the earthquake mechanism. So the orientation of vectors of plastic shear strain tells us that the fault was reactivated and the slip was consistent with the dextral strike slip. The emplacement of the pre-existing fault that we determined from the seismic could be attributed to the post-earthquake transpressional deformation, and let's see why. So the recent master research study by Terence Finley at our department, it was a geothermal study in the southeastern Cordillera. So we look here at the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin study area and Foreland Basin, and Terence was studying the faults in the Rocky Mountains. So he found that most of the faults, including the Eocene ductile fabric, were cut by the brittle dextral strike slip faults with subhorizontal striation. And these faults, whether they were reactivated or cut by this fault, so these faults are most probably related to the post-Eocene transpressional deformation, and they all reactivated as a dextral strike slips that also correspond to the earthquake mechanisms that are known in the area. But what happens in front of the Foreland Basin, Foreland Belt in the Western Canada Sedimentary Foreland Basin? So we have the shaded area of the distribution of the Duvernay Formation, and the colored symbols, they show the features that were observed. That is a study by Graham Davis and co-authors. They studied all the structural features observed in the mudstones from the Devonian to Cretaceous in the wells and in the subsurface. And there are a lot of polished slip faces or striations or cleavages that were interpreted as a deformation that was propagating up to 200 kilometers east of the Foreland Belt in the subsurface. And also, if you look at one of the wells in the study area, which is not far from the areas that I presented today, what we could observe in the core, there are, of course, subvertical granular calcite filled veins. There are beef calcite veins, subhorizontal, parallel to the bedding, which most probably formed during the caused by the hydrocarbon expulsion. But there are also rotational calcite feature around the pirate grains or low angle calcite veins oriented at about 30 degrees to the bedding, and they displace the bedding. And below them, there is a huge fault breccia zone. So there are features in the core that are related to horizontal shortening under the high horizontal stresses. That happens actually at about the distance about 120 or 150 kilometers east of the deformation front. Also, the data from the induced earthquakes shows that the mechanism of displacement is dextral strike slip on the map at the right, and also another area in the Fox Creek zone shows that sometimes it's not a singular linear fault zone, but it can be a bunch of dextral shear slip dextral strike slip faults that can be regrouped in the single flower structure, probably connected to a single fault into the basement. That is a work by Tom Eyre and his co-authors. So apparently there are a system of pre-existing strike slip faults that are affecting the subsurface Devonian beds in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin, and these faults are getting reactivated when the fluid pressure reaches those faults and because of during the hydraulic fracturing. So why we can have this high, these deformed zones into the ahead of the deformation front. So thanks to Molly, she presented recently the works by Burberry and Morgan. I was not familiar with them, but that is very helpful because it shows that the zone of high strength zone can exist in the zone away of the deformation front, and the strain is gradually decreasing. Those are results of numerical and analog modeling. And actually what we observe into the Western Canada sedimentary basin, where we have horizontal stresses decreasing from thrust fault regime to strike slip fault regime to the normal fault regime laterally. And apparently the strike slip faults were reactivated here, were formed here during the post-Eocene transpressional event, and now they are getting presently reactivated due to fluid pressure increase. So the conclusions are that the geometry of simulated hydraulic fractures interacting with natural fractures is supported by microseismic clouds. Hydraulic fractures propagate for about 500 meters east of the injection well and reach interpreted fault zone within few days that from the beginning of well treatment that correspond to the observations, and increase of formation pressure by 20 MPa during well treatment can be transmitted through hydraulic fractures and natural fractures to the fault zone. And the increase of fluid pressure by 5 MPa in the fault zone starts to the beginning of the the reactivation of the fault, and then the zone of reactivation progresses upward into the Ayrton formation with additional fluid pressure of 20 MPa. So the estimated moment release associated with simulated fault shear slip of 3 centimeters during hydraulic fracturing is comparable with the moment release from radial seismic energy of the induced earthquakes in the area. And pre-existing dextral strike slip faults represent major risk of induced seismicity and likely occur in the Western Canada sedimentary basin up to 150 kilometers east of the deformation front, and their emplacement was likely related to the post-Eocene transpressional domain. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I love the flow of it and seeing all of those modeling figures. Those were very helpful in illustrating. We do have several questions that came in. Are you able to see the Q&A? If you're not, I can read those off to you. But
yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are questions. I don't know whether to look chats first or Q&A. Q&A probably, yes. Do you know why some of the wells are perpendicular to SH marks and the other part is completely oblique? Actually, there were studies that have shown that sometimes slightly oblique to maximum horizontal stress gets better production results. That is why I believe they apply both geometries. How did you get the maximum stress? Yeah, the maximum stress is estimated in 1D modeling. If you talk about them, so the orientation of maximum horizontal stress is determined from the body hole breakouts mostly, and also from the seismic induced earthquake mechanism. And magnitude of maximum horizontal stress in 1D modeling, we use the Plumb and Thiersel model that was shown on one of the slides. And in finite element modeling, it's estimated like the full tensor of the stresses are estimated in each cell of the geomechanical model, and then it's recalculated to the maximum and minimum horizontal stresses. Can you please explain structural modeling? This plot. Yeah, structural modeling. Well, it means that we interpreted the horizons and faults and then introduce them into the model into the Petrel. And because the structure was not really complicated, So it was basically mostly horizons, and the fault in geomechanical modeling, we don't need to build it as a structure, because we assign the cells that are crossed by the fault surface to the fault elements, and we assign the properties to that fault element, so which are different from the properties of intact cells. That is what. So in this case, structural modeling was not really complicated. It's mostly in interpretation of horizons and faults. What data was used to build the DFN? Well, mostly it was, we used as a trend untracking attribute, and we used this known data from well image interpretation published previously, because we didn't have well images from the study area exactly. But when I say previously, it's not far from that. It's in the radius of 30 or 50 kilometers. And we used as a sets of fracture sets and untracking as a trend. But all other parameters were sort of, most of them, we used also the parameters of the fracture intensity or fracture density as P32, but it was mostly empirical because we don't really have those data in terms of measurements. How do you explain the delay between hydraulic fractures and induced seismicity? Well, pretty close is 500 meters, and taking that the Duvernay is very low permeability shale. The permeability is sort of 85 nanodarcy of shale itself after the measurements in the core. So the only way to get the fluid, so 500 meters, it would be extremely long. So the only way to get fluid from hydraulic fracturing zone, treatment zone of wells to the fault zone, it's 500 meters. We can expect that to have it transmitted in 4 days, we shall think about the fractures that can transmit this zone. So is hydraulic fractures or hydraulic fractures and natural fractures. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to get it through the 500 meters in 4 days with that low permeability of matrix rocks. How were the parameters governing the mechanical behavior of the fault determined? Yeah, I have. I can show a slide about those, about the properties of the fault. Just a second. Go down. Okay. So for fault properties, we used for fault normal. That is the properties of fault elements that are assigned in the modeling. So fault normal stiffness, fault shear stiffness, so cohesion, friction angle, dilatation angle, and tensile strength. So normal stiffness was taken at 6 GPa per meter. It's estimated by static Young modulus of intact rock material over the cell height. So fault shear stiffness is half of normal fault stiffness. Cohesion is 0.1 MPa. Friction angle is estimated as 75% of the angle of friction of intact rock material. Dilation angle is 10 degrees and tensile strength 0.1 MPa. So that is the default properties that we applied for this fault, estimating the properties of intact rock material in the model, which was calibrated by the data of the core geomechanical testing in the Duvernay formation. What is the pore fluid in the big picture after the before fracking? Yeah, the pore fluid before fracture, before fracturing, the pore pressure is the same as the intact rock material. It means that it's the pore pressure in above and below the Duvernay in the aquifers, like carbonates aquifers, it's hydrostatic, but in the Duvernay formation due to hydrocarbon generation, and slightly above, it's gradually diminishing through the iron carbonate shales. So that pressure is high and determined as intact pore pressure up to 60 MPa in the Duvernay at the depth of 3.5 kilometers. So that is the pressure in the fault zone before fracturing. And we apply as a single step increase of pore pressure in the whole zone of fault everywhere the same. So for example, plus 5 MPa or plus 10 MPa. So in the end, it gets the higher pore pressure in the zone of the overpressure, but only because initially the pore pressure was higher in that zone. Yeah, in the fault zone, gas or oil. Yeah, that is a good question, whether it's gas or, well, normally Duvernay, they produce mostly gas from it. So whether we can expect that gas was in the fault zone, I'm not sure. It should be, it's a good question. I will think about it, and if I can answer that, I will come back again. So why do you drill wells not Artagan? Yeah, that I believe I answered this is because some of the wells, it was shown by practical results that some of the wells drilled at slight angle to maximum horizontal stress, they do produce more, and not only the Duvernay in Jurassic, for example, or in other deposits as well, unconventional. I'm not sure why. Probably from the modeling that we did now. So what I can say is that probably it's related to the fact that probably some of the fractures, natural fractures that exist in the Duvernay, for example, probably they reopen better, or hydraulic fractures propagate better, and in this way, because you see when we model not normal fractures quite orthogonal to maximum horizontal stress, so the hydraulic fractures don't propagate far enough. But if we model that the hydraulic fracture interact with natural fractures, and they took over some fractures reactivated during the hydraulic fracturing, so probably it's propagate better and produces better. Riddle fractures. No, yeah, I didn't introduce riddle fractures in this zone because from the seismic that we could determine is just one linear zone. There was no any riddle structures, but actually other areas also in the Fox Creek zone, they do represent. And one of the slides, it shows that there is a not just single zone, but there is several series, including the riddle fractures in the fault reactivation zone. It depends on the area, but in our study we didn't have those data, so we just modeled just one single zone. How long did the fracking operation itself take? The hydraulic fracturing operation, yeah, I will probably move to that slide. It's at the beginning. So it started in April, by the end of April, but it depends which well we are talking about. So here we see that the wells A and B here, they started to be fractured at the end of April, beginning of May. Nothing happened. Sorry. And then the well C and D was started to be fractured in May 22 to the beginning of June, and on May 26, these reactivation events occurred. So that is what happened. So in reality, it was 4 days. In our simulation, it's 6 days. And again, I say that probably we can get 4 days if we model discrete fracturing network slightly differently. So then the hydraulic fractures from the earlier stages will reach the fault earlier. Is there a well interference between C and D? Well, the interference that we could notice, it's on this slide. So what we noticed that some of hydraulic fractures, they grow better on the northeastern side of the wells and less on the southwestern side of the wells. In part, it can be related to the stress shadow by the wells, which is on the other side, because those wells B and A were fractured before that. We just didn't simulate that. And also there is a secondary effect of topography, which is actually higher at about 1 kilometer and more in the southwest. And the changes in topography from southwest to northeast is getting less important for 250 meters, and the orientation of the beds is getting higher in the northeast direction. So as a result, the vertical stress is getting slightly less important in the northeast, corresponding to the southwest, and the pore pressure and horizontal stresses are also slightly lower in the northeast comparing to the southwest. That is probably also why the fractures prefer to grow in the northeast direction for the larger distance than in the southeastern direction where the stress is less. But the interaction also, it happens there. We discuss large seismic events south. I didn't discuss it. I looked through the seismic in these events to the south of the part. I couldn't find anything in seismic that would correspond to any fault or fracture zones. Probably just not seen, or it's under seismic resolution. Actually, when I started this work, I talked to the geophysicist from the company that owned and they said there is nothing. So I was just lucky to find this untracking attribute that highlighted this fault, but otherwise people considered there is nothing that can indicate any presence of faults. And actually these faults are really very difficult to distinguish because they don't show, in most of the cases, they don't show vertical offsets or very low vertical offsets. In our case, there is none. And sometimes if they are just subseismic resolution, so we can see them. Get started. So started with geomechanics. For start with geomechanics, I advise there is a MOOC courses, open courses at Stanford University, offered by Mark Zobak and his colleagues. And they offer 2 courses for geomechanics, one reservoir geomechanics and another one unconventional geomechanics course. They are open to everyone, free, and you can start getting those courses. It's usually, well, this year probably it's also already late because it starts somewhere at mid-April and ends in June. If it's still done, so it's a really good resource to start with geomechanics and understand. So is it true that some places of seismicity reaches well down to the basement? Yes, well, it's tricky issue because normally it's very difficult to. So I found that the depth of reactivation events sometimes is difficult to interpret correctly. So in our case, we were assured that the reactivation events were calibrated against the perforation shots in the area identified. So we are more or less certain about the location, vertical location of the reactivation events, but in sometimes, for example, even for this area, before this data were available, it was considered that reactivation events were related to the basement faults reactivated. So it's need to be very careful about the location, vertical location of hypercenters of the reactivation events. So, but in the places where it's really well constrained by the perforation data, like in this study area and another study area in the Fox Creek, so they all show that the location of reactivation events it's generally associated with intervals of carbonate rocks above the Duvernay. And from my opinion, that can be explained by the simulation of stresses that we have done, that horizontal stresses are high in the carbonates and low in the Duvernay. That is why the strike slip reactivation happens in the carbonates above the Duvernay. Thank you very much. In the chat, could you please explain how the low minimum horizontal stress are interpreted in the overcrashed Duvernay? The lower minimum horizontal stress, yes, the minimum horizontal stress and maximum horizontal stress, they in 1D modeling, they interpreted by these equations, the model of Tiercelin and Plumb, and what they take Poisson ratio, vertical stress, pore pressure, and Young modulus and tectonic strains. So what we do see in the model that Young modulus and Poisson ratio are getting lower in the Duvernay if compared to the carbonate-rich shales in the Ireton, and that is why actually the horizontal stresses are also getting lower. So it means that mechanical stratigraphy helps to predict layer by layer or mechanical stratigraphy dependent stresses instead of predicting the stresses just as a gradient. And that shows that they affect the stresses distribution and also explains the vertical propagation of vertical height of hydraulic fracture. Thank you very much for asking all those questions and also for good words thanking me. Thank you very much. Molly, can you take off and say whether there are anything else I can answer?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. This was really great. I really enjoyed this presentation, and these are the kind of things of why we wanted to have these webinars, and we had a great turnout. So I will have this posted on YouTube in another day or so, and we will share that link once it's available. But this was a great presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and you're getting a lot of thank yous coming through on the chat. So totally agree. Excellent presentation. So I will dismiss everybody, and thank you to Dr. Elena for joining us today. I look forward to meeting you someday and maybe even collaborating on some fun projects.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for Petroleum Structural Geology and Geomechanics Division to inviting me. It was a great pleasure and honor for us to present the results of this work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you too.